The Galactic Empire's fleet arrived with an intimidating hum, their massive ships blotting out the sky above Earth. Towering war machines lined up, and the alien warlords stood at the front of the invasion force, each one more fearsome than the last. These weren't mere soldiers, they were conquerors, beings bred for war across countless star systems. They'd destroyed entire planets, enslaved species, and now, Earth was next on their list. As the warlords observed the planet, they communicated in their alien tongue, confident that no one could challenge them. Earth's technology was laughable to them, its defenses primitive and feudal. They expected no real resistance, only swift domination. But something unexpected happened. Earth did not respond with an army, nor did they initiate diplomatic talks. No formalities. Silence echoed from the planet below. The warlords waited for surrender or attack, but none came. Instead, in the shadows, a figure was already preparing to meet them. Across the globe, political leaders scrambled, but none of their actions held much weight. They were outmatched, and they knew it. The military's best weaponry was no match for the invaders' force fields and energy shields. Earth's defenses were crippled before the fight even began. Satellite communications were intercepted and jammed, and major cities were bracing for a full-scale assault. Panic spread across the population. But unknown to the public, there was one man who had been watching from the start. In the depths of Gotham, far away from the government's panic rooms and underground bunkers, Batman had already activated his countermeasures. For months, he had been quietly preparing for something like this. The signs had been there, the strange energy readings, unusual sightings in deep space. None of it was ignored by the world's greatest detective. Batman knew something was coming, something big. He just didn't know how big until now. From his cave, he monitored the alien forces, every move tracked by his sophisticated technology. But Batman wasn't about to face them head-on. He understood his limitations. Instead, he planned to strike from the shadows, using his greatest asset, fear. The aliens didn't know it yet, but they were about to meet a kind of resistance they had never encountered before. On the streets of Earth's major cities, the alien warlords sent their massive war machines to demonstrate their power. Buildings crumbled under the weight of their weapons, and human soldiers scattered. The warlords sneered as they observed what they thought was a pathetic display of resistance. Yet, in the chaos, something strange began to happen. Their systems, perfect, flawless by their standards, started to glitch. Small sabotage missions, carried out with almost surgical precision, crippled key parts of their machines. Energy sources flickered, supply lines were cut, and their ships experienced unexpected power outages. It wasn't enough to cause major damage, but it was enough to create confusion. It was deliberate, and it was effective. The warlords couldn't understand it. No one was supposed to have the technology to interfere with their systems. Batman had been watching. He had pinpointed the key weaknesses in their machines and systems. Using his own enhanced tech, along with what remained of Earth's resources, he hacked into their communications, shut down power grids, and crippled their supplies. This wasn't war as they knew it. This was psychological warfare. The warlords were trained for direct confrontations, for massive, overwhelming battles. But here, they faced an enemy they couldn't see, an invisible hand that struck without warning. Rumors began to spread among the alien ranks. A phantom, a dark force that moved unseen, was targeting them. Some warlords dismissed it as human superstition, but others began to worry. They had never faced such tactics before. Where was the human military? Why were they losing ground to an enemy they couldn't even identify? Meanwhile, Batman continued his silent work. He infiltrated their data networks, learning everything he could about their hierarchy, their strategies, and their weaknesses. He realized that while the warlords were physically and technologically superior, they had grown arrogant. They underestimated Earth, and even more, they underestimated him. Night after night, Batman dismantled their operations bit by bit. He planted fear in their ranks, making them question their invincibility. One by one, their attacks began to falter. Power grids would fail in the middle of an assault, mechs would collapse due to unseen malfunctions, and entire fleets would lose contact with command. The warlords were slowly being driven to desperation, and the once calm and calculated leaders now showed cracks in their confidence. The Galactic Empire had never considered Earth a real threat. To them, it was just another planet to conquer, another species to dominate. But now, they were beginning to realize that they were wrong. Earth wasn't fighting back with brute force. It was fighting back with something far more dangerous: intelligence. The warlords sent scouting parties, trying to uncover the source of the attacks. Yet, every time, Batman was one step ahead. He never allowed himself to be seen. He was always in the shadows, leaving only the aftermath of his sabotage for them to find. The message was clear: Earth would not be taken without a fight, and Batman was the one leading the charge. As the warlords' frustration grew, so did Batman's confidence. He knew he couldn't take them all down at once, but with patience and precision, he could dismantle them piece by piece. The warlords, increasingly frustrated, doubled down on their efforts to secure Earth's cities. Their forces grew more aggressive, deploying advanced drones and hunter-killer units to root out what they believed to be human resistance cells. They assumed the disruptions were the work of some underground military faction. However, they couldn't anticipate the nature of their true adversary, Batman. Every move they made was tracked, every unit they sent was methodically neutralized. This wasn't warfare as they understood it. Batman didn't engage them directly. He wasn't fighting battles, he was playing chess. The first major disruption happened in New York, where the Empire's forces began deploying their mech infantry in greater numbers. However, as they advanced into the city, their lead mech units began experiencing systematic malfunctions. One by one, the towering machines ground to a halt, their systems fried by what appeared to be sudden power surges. Their sensors were jammed, communications cut off, and when they tried to reroute power, they found their backup systems had also been compromised. Batman had already infiltrated their command network days earlier. Using the intelligence he'd gathered from previous skirmishes, he built his own countermeasures. His suit had been upgraded, not just for defense but for offense. He deployed a series of EMP charges that disabled the war machines without ever needing to be near them. In the darkness, he was an unseen hand, controlling the battlefield without ever engaging face to face. The warlords couldn't understand how one individual could cause such widespread disruption. Their machines were supposed to be flawless, yet they were falling apart at the seams. Batman had adapted. His intellect and foresight were his weapons. His ability to study their technology and quickly turn it against them gave him an advantage they didn't foresee. They had the firepower, but Batman had the upper hand in strategy. The attacks became more precise. Batman didn't need to destroy entire armies. He focused on key targets: communication hubs, command centers, and energy sources. He knew that a head-on confrontation would be suicide, but by crippling their infrastructure, he could slowly bleed them dry. Each act of sabotage was meticulously planned. Every time the warlords tried to regroup, they were met with another setback. Their supply lines were cut, their drones deactivated mid-flight, and their vehicles mysteriously disabled. Fear began to spread among the alien ranks. The warlords, who had conquered countless planets, were now facing an enemy they couldn't even see. They knew they were being watched, but they had no way of knowing when or where the next attack would come. Every corner of the battlefield felt like a trap. The warlords began to question their own invulnerability. They had never faced anything like this before, a war fought in the shadows, without a single soldier on the other side. As Batman studied their behavior, he realized something critical. Despite their superior firepower, the warlords relied heavily on their technology. They had grown complacent, relying on machines to fight their battles for them. Batman exploited this dependency, systematically targeting their tech infrastructure. It wasn't just about taking out their weapons, it was about severing the very systems they depended on. Without their tech, the warlords were just as vulnerable as any human. He began intercepting their internal communications, planting false data, and feeding them misleading information. The warlords' trust in their own networks began to crumble. They issued conflicting orders to their troops, not realizing that Batman had manipulated their entire chain of command. The confusion was palpable. They couldn't coordinate their efforts, and the disarray weakened them further. The Galactic Empire had always operated under the belief that brute force was the ultimate answer, but Batman showed them the power of subterfuge. His attacks weren't just physical, they were psychological. He wanted them to feel the same helplessness that humanity felt when the Empire first arrived. He wanted them to doubt their every move. By now, rumors of the Earth Phantom spread among the Warlords. They were creatures of order, trained in the traditional art of warfare, but this was chaos. Batman had studied not only their technology but their psychology as well. He understood that fear was his greatest weapon. These warlords, for all their strength, had never known fear. And so, Batman became fear itself. He left marks at every site he attacked, a symbol that told the warlords they were being hunted. The warlords' once unwavering confidence began to erode. They were now looking over their shoulders, questioning every command, every step they took. What truly shook them wasn't just the sabotage. It was the fact that Batman never revealed himself. No matter how hard they tried to find him, he was always one step ahead. They sent teams to track him down, deploying surveillance drones and using every piece of tech they had. But Batman had already infiltrated their systems. He could see everything they were planning before they even executed it. And when they moved in, he was long gone. It was as if the entire planet had become Batman's domain, a shadow war where the warlords were the prey. They tried to escalate the conflict, bringing in more troops and deploying more advanced weaponry. But Batman remained unrelenting. He turned their escalation against them. The more resources they poured into the conflict, the more vulnerable they became. The warlords couldn't keep up. Every time they thought they had him cornered, they would find nothing but empty spaces and deactivated machines. He was always just out of reach, always anticipating their next move. It wasn't just about survival for Batman, it was about dismantling their entire strategy, piece by piece. And as the warlords grew desperate, they made mistakes. They began overextending themselves, trying to cover too much ground, leaving key systems vulnerable. Batman exploited every weakness. The Galactic Empire was powerful, but they were also predictable, and Batman thrived on unpredictability. The warlords had never faced anything like this before. They had no concept of a single enemy who could bring an entire invasion to a halt without ever revealing himself. Their forces were crippled, not by massive armies or superior firepower, but by one man, one symbol, who understood that true strength lay in outthinking your opponent, not outgunning them. As the days turned into weeks, the Empire's patience was wearing thin. The alien warlords, accustomed to swift victories, had underestimated Earth's resistance, underestimated Batman. Now, their forces were slowly crumbling under the weight of his relentless tactics. Frustration and confusion mounted. Each time the warlords thought they had regained control, Batman struck again, methodically dismantling their command structure, weakening them from within. The first major crack appeared when Batman set his sights on the warlord known as Drax, a creature known for his arrogance and brutal efficiency. Drax had been placed in charge of the Eastern Hemisphere, overseeing the invasion's logistics and troop movements. Batman had studied him closely. Unlike the other warlords, Drax was meticulous, preferring to operate from an impenetrable fortress surrounded by layers of automated defenses. Drax had been a conqueror for centuries, and he believed himself untouchable. That was his mistake. Batman infiltrated Drax's command post without ever being detected. He had already sabotaged the automated defenses, turning them against the warlord. When Drax's forces realized what was happening, it was too late. Batman had isolated Drax from his troops, severed his communication lines, and rendered his fortress defenseless. The final blow came when Drax's own security systems turned on him, a result of Batman's carefully placed viruses. As Drax fell, it sent a ripple of fear through the Empire's forces. Drax's downfall was not just a tactical loss, it was a symbol that none of the warlords were safe. Word spread quickly among the warlords. If Drax could fall, so could they. Batman's tactics were not those of a typical adversary. He wasn't looking for open battles, he was targeting the Empire's infrastructure and leadership. The warlords, each accustomed to commanding massive armies, were being picked off one by one, their forces left leaderless and confused. Next came Draxo, the warlord who controlled the skies above the western continents. His aerial supremacy had been unmatched, using massive carrier ships to dominate Earth's airspace. But Batman had studied Draxo's patterns, understanding that these giant carriers were vulnerable in specific ways. Draxo's fleet relied on centralized control systems that Batman had already infiltrated. When the attack came, Draxo's fleet was grounded in an instant. Their sophisticated navigation systems were disabled, leaving the ships stranded, unable to coordinate, or even remain airborne. The sight of these behemoth carriers crashing to Earth sent shockwaves through the alien ranks. Draxo, realizing he had been outmaneuvered, attempted to regroup his remaining forces, but Batman was relentless. By the time Draxo gathered his ships for a counterattack, Batman had already deactivated their weapons systems. One by one, the Empire's prized ships were rendered useless, and without their fleet, Draxo's forces were forced to retreat. Another warlord had fallen, and with him, the Empire's grip on Earth weakened even further. The losses were not just tactical but deeply psychological. The Empire's warlords had never experienced this kind of warfare before. Every time they tried to mount a defense or an attack, Batman was already ahead of them, anticipating their moves. The warlords had come to conquer Earth, but now they were the ones being hunted. And no matter how many resources they poured into stopping him, Batman always seemed to be one step ahead. The final blow came when Batman turned his attention to Draxo, the leader of the invasion and the most feared warlord in the Empire. Draxo was unlike the others. He had conquered entire star systems and ruled through fear and overwhelming force. Where Drax and Draxo had relied on their technology and armies, Draxo was known for his personal strength and brutality. He led from the front, and his presence alone was enough to terrify entire civilizations into submission. But Batman knew that even Draxo had his weaknesses. Draxo had set up his command center in a heavily fortified base, surrounded by legions of troops, and the most advanced defensive systems the Empire had to offer. No one had ever breached his defenses, and Draxo had never lost a battle. But Batman wasn't interested in brute force. He didn't need to storm Draxo's fortress. Instead, he went after something more vulnerable, Draxo's mind. Batman began his campaign against Draxo by targeting his sense of control. He fed false information into Draxo's systems, making him believe that his forces were winning key battles when, in reality, they were losing ground. He manipulated Draxo's communications, making it impossible for him to trust his own advisors. Slowly, Draxo's control over his forces began to unravel. His troops, demoralized by the constant losses, began to question his leadership. Then came the final phase of Batman's plan. He infiltrated Draxo's personal chambers, bypassing every security measure in place. Draxo, believing himself invincible, had grown complacent. He never expected an enemy to reach him directly. But when Batman appeared before him, Draxo realized too late that he had been outplayed. The battle between them wasn't physical, it was psychological. Draxo had built his entire empire on fear, but now he was the one afraid. In their final confrontation, Batman didn't need to fight Draxo head-on. He had already won. By the time Draxo realized what had happened, his empire was crumbling around him. His forces were in disarray, his warlords defeated, and his invasion plan in ruins. Draxo had never encountered an enemy like Batman, someone who fought with strategy, precision, and patience. Someone who didn't rely on brute strength but instead exploited every weakness, no matter how small. Draxo fell, not with a roar but with a whimper. His defeat marked the end of the invasion. The Galactic Empire, which had once believed itself unstoppable, had been brought to its knees by one man. The warlords, now leaderless and scattered, retreated in disgrace, their invasion of Earth a complete failure. The Empire had sent their most fearsome warlords, but in the end, Earth had sent Batman. And Batman had won, not through superior firepower or overwhelming numbers, but through intellect, strategy, and the unshakable belief that no enemy, no matter how powerful, was unbeatable. The warlords, once so confident in their conquest, were now reduced to remnants, their fleets in tatters and their armies broken. And as they fled Earth, they left behind a legend, a story of how one man, operating from the shadows, had outsmarted an empire and saved his world. With Draxos defeated and the warlords in retreat, the Galactic Empire's grip on Earth had all but vanished. But even as the last of the Empire's ships fled the planet, something shifted. The aliens, accustomed to easy victories, now found themselves not only beaten but utterly humiliated. This defeat wasn't just a blow to their ego. It was a statement that Earth wasn't the easy target they thought it was. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and now they faced the consequences. But it wasn't just about Batman anymore. What started as a one-man operation evolved into something far greater. Batman had always been more than a person, he was a symbol. His actions had inspired a movement across the globe. People watched as one man dismantled an empire, and they realized that they too could fight back. Across Earth, resistance groups rose up, not with the kind of brute force the warlords had expected, but with strategy and intellect. Ordinary citizens took up the mantle, using Batman's tactics to disrupt the remaining remnants of the Empire's influence. The idea that one person could make a difference began to spread, and with it, a new kind of warfare emerged, one based on ingenuity, adaptability, and resilience. The Galactic Empire, sensing that Earth was no longer a mere backwater planet to conquer, tried to regroup. But it was too late. Batman's victory wasn't just over the warlords, it was over the Empire's perception of humanity. What they saw as a weak, inferior species had turned out to be their greatest challenge. And now, they had to face the reality that their once dominant position in the galaxy was under threat. Earth wasn't just fighting back, it was inspiring other planets that had been subjugated by the Empire. Rumors of Earth's resistance spread through the galaxy, and rebellion began to stir in places the Empire had long controlled. Batman's fight had sparked something much larger than anyone could have predicted. Meanwhile, on Earth, Batman continued his work. His presence was still felt everywhere, even if most people never saw him. He remained in the shadows, guiding the resistance and ensuring that the remnants of the warlords' forces were completely eradicated. But even as the warlords fled, Batman wasn't naive. He knew that this was just the beginning. The Empire might have retreated, but they wouldn't forget this loss. They would regroup, and they would come back with even greater force. So Batman began preparing. He expanded his network, training others in his methods, ensuring that when the Empire inevitably returned, Earth would be ready. And this time, it wouldn't just be Batman defending the planet. The seeds he had planted were already growing. Across the world, new leaders emerged, using the tactics that had brought down the Empire's invasion. They weren't superheroes, but they didn't need to be. They had learned from Batman's example that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't strength or technology. It was the ability to think, to plan, and to adapt. The Galactic Empire, licking its wounds from the defeat, was in disarray. But as they tried to regroup, they realized something terrifying. The war against Earth hadn't been a fluke. It wasn't just one man who had beaten them. Earth had become a planet of bad men. The symbol Batman represented had taken root in the minds of humanity, and now, every corner of the planet had its own version of him. People who were once passive and fearful now stood tall, ready to fight for their world. And the Empire? They had no idea how to handle this new reality. Back in their distant command centers, the Empire's leaders debated their next move. Some argued for a full-scale assault, to crush Earth once and for all. But others, more cautious, understood the deeper issue. They had lost not because of inferior weapons, but because Earth's defenders had used their minds in ways the Empire had never anticipated. Even with their superior technology, the Empire had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted at every turn. And that wasn't something that could be fixed with more firepower. The defeat weighed heavily on the Empire, shaking their belief in their own invincibility. It wasn't just about Earth anymore. Other planets were watching, taking notes. If Earth could stand up to the Galactic Empire and win, what was stopping others from doing the same? The Empire was powerful, But power wasn't enough when faced with a determined and resourceful enemy. Batman had shown them that. For Earth, the victory wasn't just about survival. It was a message to the rest of the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. And even though Batman had been the catalyst, the hero everyone looked to, the true strength of Earth came from the millions who had taken up his cause. They weren't waiting for a savior anymore. They had become their own saviors. The Galactic Empire's defeat marked a turning point in the history of the galaxy. No longer could they rely on fear and overwhelming force to subjugate planets. Earth had shown that even the most powerful empire could be brought down by a single man, or rather, by an idea. And that idea had spread far beyond Earth's borders. As the dust settled and Earth began to rebuild, one thing was clear: the world had changed. The people had changed. They were no longer afraid of the unknown, no longer passive in the face of overwhelming odds. Batman had given them more than just victory, he had given them hope. Hope that no matter how powerful the enemy, no matter how dark the future seemed, there was always a way to win. And while the Galactic Empire might one day return, Earth would be ready. Not with massive armies or fleets of ships, but with the kind of resistance that couldn't be seen or predicted. The kind of resistance that came from the mind, from the shadows. From the idea that Batman had planted. As for Batman himself, he remained as he always had, silent, vigilant, watching over the planet he had saved. His work wasn't finished, not by a long shot. But he didn't need recognition or glory. He didn't need to be seen. He had done what he always did, protected those who couldn't protect themselves. And in doing so, he had changed the course of history. The Galactic Empire had learned a painful lesson: Earth was not to be conquered. And Batman? He was just getting started.